colleagues, both in person and on Zoom. Lovely to see you all. Been a long time. And Jenny, I think this is your first time actually doing it in, I was going to say in the flesh, but in person. So lovely that some of us are together. I just want to remind councillors that the public section of this meeting is being live streamed and the recording will be made available on our website following the meeting. Remind all councillors present that local government decision making affords no protection to councils, councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in the court of law and determined to be slanderous. So thank you. Can I just, in opening, thank staff for all of the work that has gone into this agenda, particularly Plan Change 6, which has been on a fairly lengthy journey. So to Julie and Ruth and team, just appreciation for all of the work that's gone in. Apologies, we have an apology from Councillor Brunning and for Councillor Stacey Rose to leave early. Any further apologies? There are none. I'll move those be accepted. Seconded, Councillor Thurston. All those in favour, against, carried. No public forum. No items not on the agenda that people wish to try and put on? No. Order of business. There will be change to the order of business to accommodate staff who will have to leave. So we're going to take item 8.3, the Essential Freshwater Program first, and then that will be followed by draft RPS change number 6, and then that will be followed mercifully by a cup of tea. So declarations of conflicts of interest, are there any? There are none. Public excluded business to be transferred to the open section. There is none. So the minutes of the 15th of February, I will move as a true and correct record. Councillor Nees has seconded. Any matters arising? There aren't. I'll put those minutes. All those in favour, aye. Raise your hands on the screen. Thank you very much, Lee. Against and carried. Right, Vicky. We are now in your extremely capable hands, Essential Freshwater Program.
Thank you. Tēnā. Nā koutou katoa, councillors, managers, staff and public who may be online. It is really good to see some people in a room again. I'm Nikki Green, Principal Advisor Policy and Planning, and here to give you an update on the Essential Freshwater Policy Program. I'll go through the paper briefly with a couple of slides. Plenty of time for some questions then if I look through that. And there was some post-agenda questions raised around the timing of expiring consents and the timing of this work. That's what Ruben is here to answer with me. So the paper is 8.3, page 36. Broadly, you've seen this slide before. We're in that second major year of this long program of work. Last year focused heavily on technical work, and in fact there is still quite a lot of that going on to inform this process. And this year very much on policy options development and continuing to invite and support the involvement of tangata whenua. We are working towards community engagement, our bigger community engagement here next year, but it will touch on online engagement. In your last workshop, I believe, you had a demonstration or explanation of our Participate Bay of Plenty page for long-term vision setting for freshwater, and that went live on Monday. So it's open to the public now for people to give feedback on what they want to see for the future of water bodies in this region. So in the paper, you will note on page 38 that we would like to start to come talk to you. We'll start with some informal briefings in May with you so that you are more prepared for the June, August and September meetings of yours, last ones before elections, to take a closer look at the policy options we're forming up across this program. Ideally, we'd like to know that there was a sense of comfort about the key policy options we will be engaging on before you go through a period where there's no decisions because of elections. The reality, I think I've noted it in the paper, there'll be some big gaps. We're working hard to keep to time on this work program, but have been continuing to be some genuinely large hurdles. COVID being one has made it, I guess, difficult to engage fully with Emmy. Their focus has been very much on wellbeing, so has the staff focus here. We've continued to work quite well, but we have had some sickness and some time off with families. We've also had delays with consultants and specialists and delivery of work from them, partly also because they tend to be in demand nationally. So we're working as well as we can to move those things forward. We're also seeing some delays with national regulations, so I think I have a slide on that coming up. However, we are still working towards this key stakeholder, key engagement period next year. And later this year, we would like to start testing some of our material with some key stakeholders as well. So some of the key delays, I think, attached to your report is a outline of risks. They're the same, largely the same risks as you have seen before, but some of them have a heightened rating of their likelihood they're becoming issues. So we have one NESF change has come through, and that was the intensive winter grazing one. I'll touch on that shortly. But others are delayed. The wetlands one, we are hearing now might not come till end of the year. Freshwater farm plans, which is a really big one for us in terms of a key tool we will use, may not be delivered till the end of the year, and we may not see a exposure draft until September. So we're working to try and keep abreast of where those national projects are up to, but they do have a bearing on how we then change and develop our work. So I think that is all that I'll present today, other than a brief update shortly around the intensive winter grazing, and it's an opportunity now for you to raise any questions around the report or the risks raised.
Well, thank you very much, Mickey. So Councillor Ondar was in, and then Councillor Neves.
Yeah, can I just have an update on overseer and where that is, because it's been an integral part of Special Plan Change 10 and where we're up to. Please.
So the government, when the independent review of overseer came out, the government's response included a couple of different pathways. Two that they've committed to include one, the development of a risk-based tool that might be used instead of overseer type based rules in the future, and the other was some fixes to overseer, some improvements that were raised by that review, which are being made, and I understand that later this year we will see that new updated overseer and also a statement of how it should and shouldn't be used for farm planning, catchment-based modelling and regulation. I suspect it will be quite limited in its recommendation on how it can be used in regulation. As we understand it, it will perform best on low slope with drainage soils, but I don't have the details of that yet. We're trying to keep abreast of that. I'll have an update on some of that tomorrow, I think. So
is there an alternative through that being developed if it's not applicable to medium and higher slopes?
As I understand it, there's no other tool being developed that would have that really measurable ability to sheet home at the farm level a nitrogen budget like that. The risk tool may play a role in policy going forward, and some of our key questions around that is we can understand that you can assess risk and seek improvement through a farm plan using a tool like that, but how can you sheet that back to a measurable improvement? How much improvement does a farmer or group of different land uses need to achieve, and how do you calibrate that across land uses and catchments? So we've got some pretty big questions, and until we see the material coming out, we're not sure what we've got.
Councillor Lees, followed by Councillor Easy.
Thank you. Well, firstly, it's great to see we're going to have those separate workshops before the meetings. I think one of our challenges is being able to digest the amount of material that you give to us in a way that we can give you really good feedback. And in the past, maybe things have come directly to a meeting and we've struggled. So that's fabulous. I just ask that you dish us up manageable size bites. I notice we're dealing with 2 or 3 chapters at a time. I think garbage in, garbage out. So I just ask that you think carefully about how much you're giving us to digest and then set feedback on. Very helpful to see the risk matrix. It's obviously a very, very difficult environment in which to work, and I think we're taking the right approach, which is a very focused yet pragmatic approach. I do have concerns about the modelling delays for Tauranga Moana. We've been working on this for a number of years. So I remember when we brought that forward, gathering all that data, and I know we had similar delays in the Kaituna area. So can you tell me what the delay is? Is it getting the model to match the data we've got, or is it lack of data? Are these modelers ones that are being pulled off to other work elsewhere in the country? And is there anything that we can do about it? When can we expect to have that information so we can make some meaningful decisions around that?
As I understand it, with the Tauranga Moana groundwater mod flow model, which we're talking about, there were some challenges with calibrating it. I believe they've now been resolved, and they are on track to deliver that model and the technical reports by the end of the year. We had, when we scheduled all of the different mod flow reports, this one was going to be delivered later than some of the others, but that calibration challenge did set them back for a couple of months.
Councillor Easy.
Kia ora rā tātou, tēnei ata, morena. Thank you, Nicola. My question is regarding the risk matrix that we have there, and just the identification around the capability of Māori to engage with this process. Could you just talk about that a little bit more? My question is around if hapu iwi are unable, because of the timelines and their current capacity and capability, if they are unable to engage thoroughly in this process, what provision is provided within the overall scope of this reform? What provision is provided for that ongoing engagement once some things are being set in stone, say? How are we going to be dealing with that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think the approach we have set in Te Hononga and that's set in the NPS is that the responsibility or duty to build that involvement of tangata whenua goes well beyond the notification date of the regional plan in 2024. It's a long-term relationship of building capacity and involvement in freshwater management. The question, there will be real difficulties in determining we'll have to be quite careful in expressing what we have managed to engage on and what's ongoing and what we anticipate might be yet to come, and trying to communicate that certain things may be appropriate to set in the plan now and more may need to come. And that will potentially apply to some of the Mātauranga Māori elements, but it might apply to some other elements of the plan as well. And we've been talking with the other regional sector people about being able to clearly tell that story to the hearings panel of what we've done to deliver the NPS and what is the ongoing plan for the future. So I don't have an absolute answer to that question. We're doing all that we can to continue to engage and be responsive and to invite participation. And I do hope that as we provide tangible options and examples, that may catalyse really focused feedback at times.
Councillor White.
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks for the report. And just following up from Councillor Iti's comments, you know, it's my sense that the pace of everything that's moved, the pace at which everything is moving. One of the things that I've noted is that the establishment of some national iwi groups to come together to discuss some of these matters and to feed directly into MFE. I think the best we can do is to continue to focus on our Hononga framework and do the best we can with that particular framework. But I do know that there are some national groups, for example, Overseer Fixers. There is an iwi group, leadership group in that particular space. I've been invited to be part of that conversation as well. And that is seen as another way to accelerate, connect through Māori into these sort of subject matters. Because I think everybody recognises the difficulty of the pace and the ability of tangata whenua to respond. So they're looking for, I would argue, more quick fix, not exactly ideal, but quick fixes that they can have input from tangata whenua and in some ways deemed to roll forward from that space. And you know, I have concerns about it because it's a complex subject matter. And when you involve a group of people who supposedly represent an iwi voice, there are some dangers in that you're not actually really connecting on the ground with people who have to work with it. So, but anyway, I think I've seen this happening now. And so I guess getting back to my point is that the Hononga framework is probably the best we can do to mobilise our tangata whenua input into our space as far as a Bay Regional Council is concerned. It's my comment.
Thank you. If we just now perhaps move to you, Ruben. We've just asked Ruben to come along because we have a number of water consents that are going to be expiring over the next term of the next council or coming up for expiry. And I just wanted, Ruben, if you're good enough to try and give us a little bit of an outline in terms of what the quantum, the nature of that quantum is likely to be and the kind of processes that will be, or the new council will be looking to use. Thanks, Ruben.
Yeah, thanks very much, Madam Chair. Morning a tātou. For anyone listening online, I'm Ruben Fraser, the Consents Manager here. And I'll give it my best shot if I understand the questions correctly. I think the first thing to say is that there are a range of consents that were issued prior to the RMA coming into force in 1991 that will all expire on the 1st of October 2026. The majority of those, so slightly over half, are water take consents. So we have 531 water take consents. And I think the message, the key message there is there's a lot to happen between now and then, particularly a lot of the stuff that Nikki has spoken to you about over quite a long period of time, and again this morning. And I think from my selfish consents perspective, there's a real opportunity for this council to make that process pretty straightforward. And the sort of key things in my mind would be when there are areas where we need to fall back allocation, and you will have heard about sort of over allocation on paper, and that being a lot higher than the water that people are actually using, then the plan has an opportunity, I think, to be quite directive about how that happens. And obviously the expiry and potential reconsenting of those water takes is a big part of that opportunity. I remain ever hopeful, and I've spoken to you about before the potential for recognising and providing for a cultural relationship in an allocation framework. I think you've all heard about how difficult that has been. I guess I remain hopeful that there's a potential for that to happen. And I think you'll understand that involving iwi hapu in consent by consent decisions is probably not the most efficient way to do it for anybody. And so that's a big question in my mind of thinking about how we might work through these processes. So if we draw a parallel between the 1,000 or so lake structure consents that expired over the last few years, we've commissioned cultural reports from Te Aroha Lakes Trust on behalf of most iwi hapu in the Rotorua area, and that's been a really great way of addressing that. I think this planning process now is the opportunity to do that rather than commissioning separate bits of work and adding to people's workload. There's also really big overlap with things like freshwater farm plans and various other sorts of requirements that particularly farmers will have under our plans and under national environmental standards and things like that, where our objective at the moment is to become the one place that people can come to understand what they can do and what they will need to do to be able to manage their land in the way that they want to, within those parameters that are going to be provided. So the focus at the moment in that area is making sure that we're involved in conversations with people who are setting those directives. So that's primarily MFE at the moment. And so that we well understand them so that we can be that, education service, I guess, in the first instance. In terms of the other sorts of consents that are expiring, the massive majority of those are discharges to water. So a lot of those will be tied up into comprehensive stormwater consents held by the territorial authorities that we'll get through in the next year or two. And then I think the rest of those will be specific enough that they still need to go through their own individual consent processes. So I guess the last strand of all of this work is looking to the next long-term plan. And we've started pulling that work together to look at what resourcing to do all of these different things that I've just spoken to you will look like. But I think, again, Madam Chair, the key message is there's a lot to happen between now and those consents expiring. And I think there are some real opportunities for this council to make it as simple as we can.
Thanks very much, Reuben. Questions, Councillor Lees?
Thank you, Reuben. The deadline of 2026, is that when they have to have a renewal application in play as opposed to having a new application granted?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Lees, and through you, Madam Chair. If the RMA is still the same when we roll around to that time, then the requirement is to have a resource consent application in 6 months prior to expiry. So that's the real deadline for people. Our expectation is that people will, people do comply with that reasonably well. We also expect that many people will look to do that early, particularly as soon as they get some sort of clarity around what plans might look like. There's always a little bit of a risk, I think, that people might sort of jump in early. Our advice to applicants at the moment and consent holders is to wait and see what the plan says. Where our expectation is that plan will be clearer than what we have at the moment. So through that probably later part of 2025 and early 2026 is when we are likely to get that big influx of applications.
So of course our plan is still going to be in the process, won't it be? We won't have, it'll have weight, but it won't have been signed off as an operative plan. That's my understanding, that as soon as the plan is notified, it has legal effect because it relates to water. And so that will be the rule framework that will be applying. So we'll be then triaging the different consents to say this one likely falls under these rules because it's in a water short area or whatever, and so there will be contaminate down this path, whereas these ones, there doesn't appear to be any issues and they can go down this track. Is that the plan?
Absolutely,
Right.
correct, yeah.
Really good to see at some point when you're that far advanced to see how many of those water takes, for example, are in areas where we think that we are at risk of being water short and where we might have to be exploring that or thinking of an alternative way of managing water, because they're going to be the ones that are the hardest, aren't they?
Yes, certainly, and that absolutely, those are the ones that will be the hardest. We can give you information now about the areas that are currently under allocation pressure, but my expectation, and Nikki will correct me, I'm sure if I get this wrong, is that how we define those areas, both in terms of on the ground and going down into the ground, are likely to be quite different, and those limits are likely to be different as well. So yes, we certainly can come back to you as soon as we have more clarity around that.
And just one further question, what if we change our commercial limit as part of the plan? We may have a whole lot of more consents, or it might be complicating the takes that they're already got consents for. So are we thinking about that? Because that is a whole new ballgame.
That might be it. Okay. I think from a consenting perspective, the normal process would be, as we go through any plan, we will look at what the resourcing implications might be in terms of, like you say, if we do change permitted limits, and I think you're suggesting bringing them down, how many people would that trigger the need to get a consent for, and how would we run that process? I don't think we've gone into that sort of detail just yet.
Nikki, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, that's correct. So if our limits change, it will capture different parties that may not have needed consent before, and there'd have to be some education and publicity about that. Our ability to determine how many people that is limited, because they don't have to telemetry and provide data at the moment. So we can make estimates.
Councillor Easy.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Kia ora, Ruben. There's been some discussions around when we've spoken about this regarding the consents of water take in over allocated areas, where really it's been a first in, first serve model, and that there's some inequities that come with the first in, first serve model, and now it's all allocated, and now there's nothing left. Within these reforms, how are we looking at dealing with those kinds of issues? Kia ora.
Thanks, Councillor Etienne, through you again, Madam Chair. There's certainly, in my understanding, the ability to allocate water to an activity or a sort of use. So, for example, you could, I think, allocate water to develop undeveloped, multiply owned Māori land, as an example. And I think those sorts of conversations are certainly on the table for the planning process. I don't know if there's a simple solution to that just through the consenting process. It needs to be outlined in the plan.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's we do have a piece of work launching around different options and assessing those for cultural allocation for both nutrient and for water quantity, and just exploring what pathways and options we do have. The challenge if you're in an over allocated catchment for either nutrients or water quantity is that at a time when you're trying to phase out that over allocation, you're also looking at how to then provide it to somebody else. So we're making the immediate impact of that on people that currently have access to water is greater. If the catchment is not over allocated, that new regime may be simpler to implement, but we're exploring all of those options.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Ruben, of the ones that are really important in terms of scale of the local authority reconsenting in terms of wastewater discharge? I presume they are captured up there. And as a follow-on from Councillor Neese's question regarding application within 6 months of expiry, this is going to transact the implementation of the Four Waters entity. So who makes the application? Is it going to be the new water entity? Is it going to be the existing one? And the worst position I think that we should focus on to try and mitigate is that some of these applications are made and then the action around the new standards and the consents. And there's a term that currently Rotorua have got in terms of extended use of forestry that you use. That these some things in terms of expired consents, in terms of discharge, could transact another decade. So where do you see the risk in terms of how we manage those? Because to me, and from the community's perspective, these are the big kahunas that we've got to deal with.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and through you again, Madam Chair. I think you've articulated the risk really well. Our focus at the moment is to start those conversations with the TAs early, particularly around those wastewater discharges, and we're doing that now. And I think in general terms, the TA approach has been to say we're carrying on business as usual with the expectation that they are going to need to go through that consent process. And so met, for example, with the Porty District Council about their wastewater discharges last week. And they're well down the track of planning for reconsenting those things and are very aware of the upgrades that they need to do to bring their infrastructure into line with modern standards. I don't have any certainty around what happened, who holds the consents longer term. My assumption would be that whatever those new entities are, will take over those consents and will need to take them over as we've granted them.
Great question, Mr. Chairman. Any further, Councillor Eadie, have you got a new question?
Yeah, aroha mai, Madam Chair. I did have a supplementary question. It's a bit hard from Zoom to cut in. It's following on from my last question around the first served model, is the issue around water banking and those who are sitting on allocation on consents who don't necessarily use it, but on paper it looks like the that area is over allocated, and whether or not we're looking at tackling that particular kind of issue. So say, and we've had submitters before who have turned up and said they have a consent on some water, they've had it for 30 years, they're trying to hold on to that for their kids and their grandkids, because they got purely on the fact that they got in early and they had those consents. So the area looks like it's over allocated, but actually it's not. I'm not sure whether the reconsenting or the consent renewals in 2026, whether some of those consents are tied up within the 531 water take consents that are up for renewal. But I'm just wanting to, I guess, know whether or not we're taking that into account, those kinds of issues, separate to say if there's cultural takes based on activities, but just in general, that kind of practice where people bank water and whether we're looking at dealing with that.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor T, and through you again, Madam Chair. Yes, certainly. I think every time we renew a resource consent or issue a new one, more correctly, we'll only issue a consent for what we would consider to be an efficient use of that water. And so in general terms, every time we go through that process, particularly for consents that were issued some time ago, we will be looking at the records that those consent holders have provided us for how much water they've used over the last 5 or 10 years, depending on when they started providing those records to us. And the normal outcome is that the new consent will allocate a lot less water than the original consent. And so obviously that reduces that paper over allocation. And I think that will be particularly true for these 531 pre-RMA water tank consents, because they don't in general have annual or daily or weekly limits. They'll have a rate or a daily volume that they're allowed to take. And so they will be in our records reflecting a lot more water than is actually being used.
Okay, Councillor Eadie, thank you. Any further questions? There aren't, so we're back to you, Nikki.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben.
I'll
Excellent.
go back one slide, and this was just a note to say that a week ago, the amendments to the intensive winter grazing regulations came into being and come into effect in November. So farmers don't have to do anything with this winter season. It's next winter season that these regulations will apply. Some changes have been made, and some, like the critical source areas, which includes gullies and swales and areas where water might flow and carry contaminants, actually have to be not planted in forage crop, planted in grass water, not grazed. So there's a level of protection to those now. So there are the replacements of some of the conditions that were very difficult to implement with these broader ones around best practice, reasonably practical steps. For us, I think Eddie Grogan has reported to you before, intensive winter grazing on forage crops isn't a widespread practice, but it does occur in a few more parts of the region than we were originally aware of, and he is still working to map those and make sure that those farmers are notified of these new regulations, and so that will sit with the consents and compliance team to implement now.
Councillor Nays.
Just a question, this only applies where we have intensive winter grazing, but is there a differentiation between waterways that may not be flowing unless there's heavy rain, or natural flow paths, which are areas which might be depressed, and if there is major floods, that's where the water goes? So will they capture those natural flow paths?
I'll have to go back to the definition of critical source area, but I think it will pick up on those flow paths that very clearly carry contaminants that could enter water bodies.
Thank you, Nikki. Who did that painting? Is that for sale? Because I love it.
Lisa Power told us recently that that was a children's competition several years ago, and that was the winning entry. So we actually do need to search out the name of the child that entered it, I think, so that it can be recognised. It might be several joined together. Yeah.
Art is in the eye of the beholder, councillors, colleagues. Okay, Nikki and Ruben, thank you very much indeed. I don't think there are any further questions on that. I'm going to move receipt of the report, seconded by Councillor Lees. All those in favour say aye, and hands up on screen. Those against, it is carried, and I think the one maybe takeaway that we can say is all the very best to the new council. Right. We're now going to move to RPS Plan Change 6, NASA and Ruth. So just by way of introduction, this RPS Plan Change has been on quite a journey. And again, I want to reiterate our appreciation to the staff for all of the work that's gone into this. I guess the key point to make is that this plan change to our RPS is simply, in simple terms, to implement new government direction, the NPS UD. So councillors, you will have received the section 32 analysis, which I'm going to now use for fitness purposes. You will have received the report from John Oliver, in relation to the risk assessment around the SPP process. You will have a copy of the actual latest plan change itself, and you will have received some papers requested outlining some tangata whenua engagement. So 2 issues that we have to really focus on today, councillors, are how are we feeling about where the RPS plan change wording has landed, and where are we at with the SPP process, or going back to a Schedule 1. If at the end of the day we decide that we will no longer pursue the SPP process, then we will require some rescinding of our previous positions and moving to a Schedule 1. However, we're not at that stage yet, because we're going to have a discussion. So without further ado, again, Ruth and NASA, thanks again, and in your capable hands.
Through the chair, just before we jump into Ruth and NASA, if I could just acknowledge the comments that you've made in terms of us being on a journey to get to us to this point in time. I do also want to just note that the documentation that you have in front of you, particularly the Section 32 analysis and the plan change text itself, we do note that there is a few typos, cross-references, mention of Tauranga City Council, Western Bay of Plenty, which will need to be amended. So we do just acknowledge that, and that we will go through that document quite thoroughly to resolve those issues. We do also note there was an omission of UG 14B within the plan change that you have, and we will look to rectify that as well. And I know staff will just cover off the comments in relation to Relax Council and just their tier status too. So I hand over to NASA and Ruth.
Can I just comment on that there are some tweaks that have been observed, and what Namuta has just referred to. And in our amended recommendations, we do include a catch-all which says basically bring us back the absolute final version for the great big green tick off. So we're nearly there, but that is the last step in the process. So sorry, Nessa, Ruth.
Tēnā koutou katoa, councillors and chair, and those online. I don't really have anything else to add to the comments by the chair and the Muta at this stage, other to answer any questions that have come through, and just reiterate that yes, we've still got some tidying up to do with the documentation, and because of some recent developments in iwi feedback on the process, that's essentially the key decision for today, and therefore that sort of directs the next steps. So
thank you, Ruth. Can I say that my position has changed, and that is largely as a result of reading John Oliver's risk assessment, and as a result of looking at the combined tangata whenua forum issues, and really particularly the MFE's comments that the SPP is not really a fast track, and that they, so I found those reports really interesting and helpful. And so just to let councillors know that my position has changed, and I would be looking to support going back to a Schedule 1 process based on that risk assessment and iwi feedback. But anyway, councillors, I'll leave it open to you to now ask questions or make comments. So, opening the floor.
Councillor Mays.
Just a question. I tend to agree with your view of the world, Madam Chair. I do believe that having read through the tangata whenua feedback in the consultative processes, there was quite a bit of concern about the SPP process. And I am concerned that if we proceed with the SPP process, we may not have a plan change that has been notified before the required date, but by the NPS urban development capacity. So they are my key reasons about getting something as soon as possible to guide the planning process, and listening very carefully to what tangata whenua were telling us about the process they want us to use. My question is, if we do change our decision on what process we use, how will we advise that change of decision, and to whom? I presume we'll have to let everybody know that we've engaged with, and also there will possibly be other people that we actually didn't formally engage with, but are still thinking that we're going down a certain track. Also, how we manage the discussions we've had with the ministry and the minister to make sure that any potential political risk of us jumping from one process to another is managed. And also some surety that any of the documents that we've been building up, for example, the Section 32 analysis, all bring through the amended change of process. Because reading through it, there was quite a bit about the value of undertaking the SPP process, which we are now making a different decision on because we've got more information.
Yes, to all of those, Councillor Nees. Yes, definitely we would need to do some communications, a simple email at the least, to all our stakeholders, including iwi hapu and other stakeholders we've involved or contacted about the process. That's relatively straightforward to do. In terms of updating the Section 32, yes, that would be a given in terms of reflecting the decision made today. And in terms of I don't think there's actually been any communication directly with the Minister on this particular matter. There's been communication obviously with the officials at the Ministry, but as far as I know, the Minister hasn't been talked to directly unless the officials have talked to the Minister. But we don't necessarily see a huge risk in terms of the Ministry and changing the decision, which is perfectly within Council's rights to decide the process for its own plan change.
So apart from that political risk, are there any other risks that you just want to highlight for us to consider before we make this decision?
I think the key things have been noted by the Chair, the risk to relationships with iwi and hapu and the treaty relationships there, which I think would be shared by the Minister in terms of their opposition or lack of support for an SPP. And also just a key one is timing of notification.
Timing of notification and the waiting. I've got Councillor McDonald, then I've got Councillor Love and Councillor Von Darlison. Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Just to reiterate the concerns around the current engagement with tangata whenua and specifically what's come out of the Smart Growth Combined tangata whenua meeting that was last held. I don't think it's insurmountable. However, it will be if I think both council and tangata whenua are not resourced properly to become fully engaged. But it's a topic we're well aware of and cognizant of that we're trying to deal with. However, at the rate of what's being progressed is the issue of keeping abreast with what's happening, and I guess that's a huge concern that's coming out of the Smart Growth Combined tangata whenua. Just to give a heads up as well is that the Tauranga Moana Advisory Group has responded to the SPC process for Omokorua with a letter going to the Minister around the consultation engagement process that he has signalled he will be using, and just really raising that whole concern that in view of the treaty settlement not yet being settled for Tauranga Moana, for him to tread caution around his involvement of Hauraki tribes in the consultation process within the Māori constituency. So when we talk about potential issues around this process, that whole consultation process needs to take into cognizance where the treaty settlement is currently sitting for Tauranga Moana, which we have alluded to in a letter to the Minister on behalf of the Tauranga Moana Advisory Group. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. So are you supporting us reverting to a Schedule 1 process?
I think I think there needs to be a further discussion around that. And I think it's even a further discussion that needs to be held with the Smart Growth Combined Tangata Whenua Forum as well.
Thank you, Councillor Love.
What I'm actually supporting is a discussion around that.
Thank you, Councillor Love, then Councillor Von Bartelsson.
Lead on quite well from what Matt and Mino was just asking. We're placing an awful lot of reliance on John Oliver's report. I just want to check that is he a lone voice, or how much reliance can we place on his particular report?
John's got extensive experience as a planning consultant. He's been involved with a fair number of high-profile developments. So yeah, as an expert, I would trust his advice on this.
I think I'd prefer to get another expert, a second opinion on this before because I think this is really a major step, and I don't really mind if we have to take that step, but I just want to make sure we are making the step correctly. And I don't want to just rely on one person's evidence to make that step.
Councillor Von Bartelsson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, this process, effectively, if we go back to the Schedule 1, is a kick in the teeth to the current government, in my view, and that it's us saying they've got the new legislation wrong, and we're going to use the opportunity we have to go back. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I am very surprised that our staff haven't gone to the office of the Minister to find out their stake, because of course the Minister can veto, if I've got this right, can veto an SPP process himself before it even gets off the ground if we haven't done the due consultation with iwi. So there are risks both ways in this. I think that the merit of the SPP was to try to get urban development fast tracked. That was the aim of the process that the Minister, when they initiated the Act, that's what they were aiming for. And this is us saying, well, we can't do it. And we're back to square one. And I think I'm a bit saddened that it has got to that. And we appear, to be held over a barrel by iwi on this. And just to say that they will blanket, they object as a blanket without actual individual decision making, to give us the reasoning. And so I think we do have to take a lot of care before we actually turn back the clock. I'm not saying we shouldn't turn back the clock, but this is a very delicate process, and yet it's one if we go with the SPP, we might not get past stage 1 anyway, because the Minister can't stop it. So that would delay us. We'd then have to go back to Schedule 1. And so I'm loath to be making a decision without having taken some advice from the Minister, so that we know where we stand. I think we're actually overly rushing. This is a long process, and if we go back to Schedule 1, it can become a very expensive process. We know that, just on the time that it takes to get through the Environment Court and the staff hours that'll be required. Has there been any consideration on that as to the cost between the two processes and the time involved and the cost to us as a council, let alone the cost to the submitters?
We actually have thought about the staff resources that would be needed to prep or get the information needed for the minister for the SPP. So one of the key issues would be that we would expect the minister to require us to get formal feedback from, if not all iwi and hapu in the region, because it's a regional plan change. At the very least, all the iwi and hapu in the 3 urban environments across our region. So, as we've noted before in the previous item, iwi engagement is particularly tricky at the moment, and they may have other priorities. Or indeed, I'm aware of some iwi that their core resource management staff are moving on to other jobs, so there's a lack of capacity in some ways. So it would be tricky. There'd be a lot of work getting that ready for the SPP. Just in terms of some of your other questions, Councillor Von Danielson, in John's memo, he does note that MFE staff have advised that they have no preference for either an SPP or Schedule 1 option, and accept that whatever process is chosen should be fit for purpose for the local situation. In the Western Bay situation, we obviously have the urban boundary line or the urban limits. In terms of notifying an actual RPS change, if we went for a Schedule 1 process, we could probably notify about August or late August this year. If we go for the SPP, I would think it would be early to mid 2023 before the RPS plan change can be notified. It's that grey area between, or I'm going to say August and 2023, which would actually hold up any urban development, because we would have to enforce the urban boundary line. Should we notify in August, at least it starts to have some weight from that point.
Other councillors' comments, please. Mr. Chairman.
Madam Chair, I take it that the staff recommendation is the streamlined planning process by looking at the recommendations?
Through the chair, just to clarify, that was the position when we wrote the paper originally. We now have some updated recommendations for you to choose between whether we continue with the streamlined planning process or change to a Schedule 1 process. Given the additional information that we've had since your previous workshop in relation to tangata whenua feedback on the streamlined planning process, and also further discussions with MFE, the staff position has changed to recommend now a Schedule 1 process. So we have a new set of resolutions to reflect that, depending on the direction that we get from council. So there's 2 sets of resolutions for you to consider.
Thanks, Chair. On the basis of staff recommendation, on the basis of your overview of this, please to accept your direction.
I think the point that Ruth just made is a really important one. That is that if we revert to a Schedule 1, we will be in a position to notify. The plan will have weight, and that's what, to me, the plus is. The SPP could see us in a position where we aren't in a position to notify for some considerable time, hence delays. Councillor Von Danielson.
Yeah, I never got the answer to the long-term cost to council of one, recognising the SPP might not even get past stage 1, but if it does, what's the cost? And staff, what's the cost to us as councillors, and what's the likely cost to the submitters in the time?
Essentially, the costs are the same until an appeal point. So in an SPP, there's no appeal rights, and then the minister makes the final decision. So there would be no appeal cost there. So that's really the only savings. However, because RPS Change 6 implements NPSUD or government direction, we feel that the risk of appeals is lowered on this particular RPS. Well, it's not as much. There is a sort of limited things to appeal on that aren't in that are outside anything that we're required to do by the NPSUD.
Lorraine?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I do want to clarify that we did give consideration to the cost for the whole of the process. And as Ruth has mentioned, we feel that a particular concern is around the appeals, but due to the directive nature and the scope of this plan change, on balance, with also the extra further work that as officers we have to do, not submitters, but as officers through the preparation and working with ministry on the application, we feel that the costs are comparable either way.
Thank you, Lorraine. Other councillors wish to comment? Councillor Crosby.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. This is quite a challenging decision, to say the least. As in John's report, there are advantages and disadvantages of either process, and I think streamlined planning process is a bit of a misnomer, actually, in real terms. One of the things that worries me is if we went down that track, you're shifting the final decision from a judicial process to a political process, and that in itself is a bit of a worry. From my experience, if the original planning documents are done in a robust way and meet the needs of the community, then the appeals tend to be limited at the highest level. But one of the downsides of Schedule 1 when you get into the Environment Court is it's a money game and it's a resource game, and it actually excludes a large number of people because they simply cannot afford to participate in that process. And so money talks, and I've observed many a scrap in the Environment Court between council and, let's say, a developer who come with every expert under the sun to convince the good judges what to do. So that's the downside of Schedule 1. The upside is if you have a robust process, you shouldn't want to land in that space. And if you land in that space, often it's a very limited, hopefully it's a very limited sphere of the challenge, not the general way. So I guess on balance, I'm supporting the new recommendations that we maintain Schedule 1. Also in the context, of course, we're under starters orders for significant RM reform. And so I would see us adopting the streamlined planning process as quite a complication until we get some more certainty around where all the RM reform is going to land with the proposed regional, that's not regional council, but regional planning processes, and how that impacts on the decision-making process yet to be confirmed or understood. So I think the safer way, and if the goal is to achieve sustainable development in a faster process, and the confusion that we have at the moment, I would suggest Schedule 1 is still the fastest way to achieve it, and it's more inclusive at the end of the day.
Councillor White.
Yes, Madam Chair, just listening to the conversation and having read the reports as well. Yeah, I agree. It's a pretty complex situation, but I'm favouring going back to Schedule 1. But I'm interested in Councillor McDonald, your comments when prompted whether you'd go back to Schedule 1 or not, that you would favour further discussion. What would you be hoping to achieve with further discussion? You're on mute, Martin Wana.
Aroha mai. I guess some of the discussion I would want to take up with tangata whenua, the comments actually made now by Councillor Crosby, and it's that, you know, if we do end up in the Environment Court, how detrimental that would be for them through lack of finance to pursue what they need to in that environment. That's one of the things that I would want to talk to them about. I can totally understand that it opens up wider inclusion of community as well, but certainly I'd want to look at those areas that they've struggled with in the past and continue to struggle with, and particularly when they do end up in the Environment Court. So I guess that's, you know, it's that balancing thing, going from one to the other. And I guess just weighing up the pros and cons for them over which they would support. I could probably see them supporting Schedule 1, but still giving them the opportunity to look at those pros and cons of that process. But, you know, I just want to reiterate too that I don't think this is insurmountable. I still think that we're still not, and I know there is a cost issue, but, you know, if it's something we have to pursue to get over the line, I still think we're lacking in providing the time and the resourcing to cover off that key engagement we need to be doing with hapu and iwi. When I look at our own internal resourcing and look at Māori policy, which is highly under-resourced to be able to carry out effective engagement throughout the Tui Moana region. And I know we've got Te Honanga, and it's an excellent document, but when it comes to the implementation of the document, I think that's what where we are actually falling down. We need the manpower on the ground, and we need some sort of reporting of what that needs to look like for us to get that effective feedback we need, so that we're not challenged in our processes by tangata whenua when we're moving forward with this. So, you know, that's really what I really want to reiterate. I don't believe it is insurmountable. It's just that we're not really injecting into the process what's needed to get us over the line. Kia ora.
Councillor White, do you have further comments?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, in my question, and going back to Schedule 1, no, I like the thought of being able to rely on robust approaches to this particular situation. And it seemed to me that going back to Schedule 1 will offer that. I acknowledge what Mati Moana has said around the necessary resource to amplify robust. But yeah, my sense is that I would still prefer to go back to Schedule 1 at this stage.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? I will be proposing a motion which will be up for debate and discussion. It's on the screen in front of you. It's receiving the report, confirming the RPS change, rescinding previous resolutions, agreeing that we will use Schedule 1 process for the following reasons, and I will read these out. They are to ensure notification of Plan Change 6 to meet the NPS UD requirements to enable growth and urban development to happen more quickly. Secondly, to acknowledge further information received from the Ministry for the Environment regarding the process. And thirdly, to reflect tangata whenua feedback received on the processes. So, sorry, Jenny. We're delegating to Namuta to be able to make minor changes, and we're directing that the absolute final version of the RPS change comes back to Council for consideration and final approval. So I'll just give the reasons again. To ensure notification of change 6, to meet NPSUD requirements to enable growth and urban development more quickly. Secondly, to acknowledge further information received from the MFE regarding the process. And thirdly, to reflect the tangata whenua feedback received. I am going to move that motion. Do I have a seconder?
Sorry, as Chair, 2 is gone. Is 2 gone? Because
No.
that's,
Like councillor Ryan.
it included this streamlined planning process application.
No, we're going to take the wording included in the streamlined planning. We're just going to put a full stop after section 32 report, please, Jenny.
I still am not comfortable about confirming it. Because we haven't seen the final version of it. I don't want that to be construed in the future that we've actually signed it off.
Okay, well, given that we've actually got number 6 in there, which is the final direction, we can take that out, I think, in its entirety, take 2 out.
Okay, comfortable with that. It's just I don't want to be signing up something that I haven't, that I had concerns about when it was sent to us because of omissions and errors.
So I have moved the motion. Do I have a seconder?
Can I make a comment first?
Councillor Love.
I'm still not happy in making a decision at this point. I don't think we've got, I certainly haven't got the confirmation that the information is correct in all respects. I prefer to see that. I can't, I'm in a cleft stick and I don't want to vote for, I don't want to vote against. I hate to abstain, but I don't think I've got any other option at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Just acknowledge further information received from Ministry for Environment, not Minister, under the reason. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Crosby. Further debate and discussion.
Typo of the first bullet point too. Change 6.
Thank you. And it should be RPS change 6. Sorry, let's just acknowledge that this is a high pressure environment for Jenny to be operating in, and we'll just give her a moment. So if you go to the first bullet point, ensure notification, RPS change 6.
In 3.
It's in 3. Not 60. Down, but.
Oh, yes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, Mr. Chairman.
I'm happy with it, Chair. I just think we've just got to make a decision to answer Councillor Love's issue. I mean, it's not the first time this has been around the traps. The only question I've got is this hearing then goes before those appointed commissioners, is that right?
The freshwater.
Yeah, does this go between to those hearing commissioners or a separate group altogether?
No, there would be a separate hearings panel appointed by council.
Okay.
Councillor,
So we're going
sorry.
to have appointed commissioners from council. Are they going to be all independent? You're going to recommend it? You don't know yet.
So through the chair, and paper that we bring back to you for the adoption of the plan change and the section 32 analysis in June, will also provide recommendations in relation to hearing panels.
Councillor McDonald.
Just a change of wording in the third bullet point to replace iwi with tangata whenua.
As the mover, I'm happy to accept that. Councillor Crosby is happy also to accept that amendment. Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Further debate and discussion.
I absolutely support what we are proposing to resolve. And what I would like is when the plan change 6 comes back to us with the amended section 32 report, that we do also get some advice as to how our amended decision was received. I don't want to be flip-flopping, but I think we need to be going into this eyes wide open. So my expectation is that we'll have a really robust communication strategy around this decision. And should we get negative feedback, I think we need to know about it before we sign off the plan change.
Thanks, councillor Nees. Further debate, discussion? There being none, I am going to put the motion. All those in favour, say aye or raise your hands on screen.
Aye.
Against? The motion is carried.
I was going to abstain.
Thank you, Ruth and Nessa. You can go and have a cup of tea now to celebrate. Sorry, councillor.
I abstained. You didn't get the motion.
Oh, beg your pardon, abstained councillor Love. Thank you. So I think we'll take a break now for 15 minutes, come back just after 11 or 11:05. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. So we'll resume the meeting and its operating environment, item 8.1 on the agenda. Welcome Julie and Stephen. So Namuta, you'd just like to make some introductory comments?
Tēnā koutou, councillors, and to the chairs. We'll take the report as read. This is the operating environment report. You'll all be very aware of our very complex and constantly changing operating environment that we're working within. More recently, we've had recent announcements in terms of Three Waters, climate change adaptation, the new national freight studies come out. And just as well, we've got, there is the He Pōpō, which is a plan to realise the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People of Aotearoa. They've got a report that's actually coming out as well on the engagement feedback, and I've got a one-pager that will circulate to you too. But we will, Julie, Stephen and myself are here to answer any questions you may have. And certainly I am aware that a number of councillors will likely have more up-to-date information in relation to recent announcements and their experiences.
Thanks, Namuta. Did I hear you say the new national freight strategy?
Yes. Staff are currently looking at it, and we'll be able to give you a summary and more details shortly.
Okay, I think that would be of great deal of interest to most of us, so if we could get that information, it'd be useful. Right. Councillors, I'm going to invite Councillor Crosby and our chairman, both Local Government New Zealand, obviously officios, so if you want to add anything further, we'd be grateful. Thanks. Stuart.
Well, thank you, Chair. Namuta's raised a few more policy statements or draft ones that have come out since the writing of this report. The New Zealand adaptation strategy, I'd encourage you all to have a look at. It seems to be reasonably robust at the moment, and we'll obviously seek to make a submission on that. The Infrastructure Commission one also came out yesterday, I think it was, which is over 100 and something pages, a lot of recommendations. On the face of it, seems to make sense. But you do start to question where are all the connections on these with be it RM reform and Three Waters. Last Friday, I was in Wellington and listened to the Minister of Local Government and the Finance Minister's update on Three Waters. As you're aware, they've fundamentally accepted 43 of the 46 recommendations from the Three Waters group, led by Doug Martin, and the other 3 recommendations are still under review. I think one of the outcomes of that is they went to quite a lot of effort to clarify where the proposed co-governance sat in the structure. It hasn't changed, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about where it actually did sit. So it's actually a tear down. That's the simplest way of describing it. The actual governors will be independently appointed by council and iwi on skill-based and nothing else, actually. So that they went to some lengths to understand that. I think what we need to understand, though, that there's a national transition unit up and running. And yesterday we had a Three Waters steering group, which I've been on for nearly 2 years now. which went through a range of issues that they're looking at, and including where existing consents sit, etc., etc. So it'd be suffice to say that this is an incredibly complex piece of work that they're finding out about. We knew that, but so the National Transition Unit again are staffing up. They have a work program ahead of them. They have already started engaging with councils, which is putting yet more pressure on particularly critical staff within councils, to give information, etc., and engage. We understand some resourcing is soon to be made available, as it will be with potentially iwi Māori. Again, to put more pressure on their RM units or operational units to engage. With regard to the other aspects of the National Transition Unit, they are sticking to a pretty tight deadline. We expect the first bill to come into the House in a matter of weeks, and that will be fired up by another amendment bill to the final act sometime next year. As you're aware, the timeframes were to have some establishment groups up and running for the 4 entities by 1st July this year, and these entities to be up and running and operational by the 1st of July 2024. So if we took one message out of Friday's update, it was that they are pursuing this with a time frame. We, LGNZ, will still be looking at these bills and seeing what we need to do to submit in terms of supporting our sector and their concerns. The key issues that were really in the recommendations that were adopted from the working group are related to describe it as a nominal shareholding. It's not your traditional shareholding that holds a value, etc., etc. And it was never designed to do that. It was designed fundamentally to put another block into any future government's proposal to privatise. But the biggest change and the biggest gains still don't satisfy a lot of our sector, bringing that local voice back into the conversation at a stronger level. And we would need to see all the processes and systems and documents that can happen, because it's not just one, it's actually a number of them being proposed, and also economic regulation will come into. That was the biggest concern that our sector had, that you had these entities that were independently run, they were really divorced from the councils and the community. So a number of these recommendations have attempted to bring that closer. The caveat still is that this has to be run through standard and paused, because one of the goals of the government's model is balance sheet separation. And they have a concern that the closer you bring community back into the decision-making process, that could blur the issue of balance sheet separation. Personally, we don't think it does at all. I think it's a red herring, to be frank. But they'll go through that process and see what pops out the end. And of course, we had the sea level rise, New Zealand sea level rise report come out yesterday, I think it was, and everyone rushed to the maps, as I did, and the thing nearly crashed. Well, I think it did for a while. So again, interesting work, but I guess if I summarised it all, our concern is, whereas local government New Zealand's concern is, how do all these proposals integrate? And we've made that submission to the Prime Minister, then the Minister of Local Government, and we have made the offer to work with them to make sure that they actually do integrate. Now, finally, we've asked for a lot of these reforms, so particularly in the RM space, through water space, in terms of infrastructure space. But the biggest worry is there seems to be a build-up, an announcement, a policy, and then local government let's make it all work. So the space we're trying to get into in these reports is to get early in the development of them. So that when councils ultimately have to, in many regards, implement these things, that they're actually functional and achieve the goals that they set out to achieve on the ground.
Thanks, Councillor Crosby. Councillor White.
Madam Chair, just listen to Councillor Crosby. You know, there's so many moving parts in this. It's more of a comment than anything. So many moving parts and more parts added daily. It sort of wants me to reach for my asthma pump, and I don't have asthma, you know. And it's just, and if we are the translators to the community, and the expectation is that that there's an expectation that we want to grow community expectation and understanding. Well, hell, we've got to understand this ourselves, and how do we pull this puzzle together? You know, and this emerging mass of infrastructure that's coming into the conversation. It's almost like well, it's a challenge, put it that way, and that's just putting it really, really mildly. I must admit, I'm struggling to actually piece it all together and to understand how this is all integrating into some magic formula, some picture that revitalizes our communities, our environment, and everything else. But it just seems to be a massive confusion, complicated by the pace and speed of everything that's happening, and an expectation on a community that's, as we say, is under-resourced to deal with this anyway. So that's just my opening comment. I'm just sitting here listening to this and going, well, you know, as an elected member, I've got to make some sense of this and translate it so that we can have reasonable conversations around this table, for one, and secondly, I can actually relay messages back to the constituency. And right now, I'm sorry, I'm perplexed really. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Councillor Wright. Councillor Lees.
Thank you. I think the thing that concerned me most about the commentary that came out about Three Waters over the weekend was, we've always said one of the fundamental issues has been not enough money to actually address the infrastructure woes for freshwater and for wastewater and stormwater. Huge amounts of money is required, and there just weren't the tools, the rating tools, or the rating base to be able to support that expenditure. The government came out and said, well, we're not planning to put any extra money in. The government isn't going to be funding it. And I mean, maybe they will in the future when they realise the scale of the issues that they're dealing with, but I cannot for the life of me see how they're going to actually address the scale of the issue that they're highlighting under the existing mechanisms of debt and our rates. Well, they won't have rates, it'll all be debt, I presume. So I feel there's a sense that it might all unravel when they actually get up and running and see how much they've got to do. And it'll be a long time before they actually get it all done. So that's just one comment. The other issue is about the table that we've got here, which is the taking responsibility for our waste stream of work on page 25. There's some flags there, potential to changes for our current role and responsibilities. Have we any line of sight as to when that work is going to pop out? It was consulted in October, November 2021, so sort of, I presume somebody's beavering away somewhere on that.
We assume someone is beavering away on it. We haven't seen anything come out yet, though. There was one of the flags we identified as a question. We haven't had any response yet.
Councillor Crosby, do you want to comment on the financial issues Councillor Lees has raised?
Yes, it's a very good question. It's a question we ask all the time. Our understanding is that these water service entities will have a capability of borrowing up to 700-800% of revenue, as opposed to local government will around 250 to 300. I think, and it's still yet to be clarified, the government will have a role in terms of, as it does with the current local government banking system, you know, to support it with their credit rating. So the whole point of these entities is that they are self-funding and that the rating tools, as you rightly say, you know, it's a system failure, it's not a council failure in this three water space. The current funding tools just don't have the capability or capacity. And so that will be in part remedied by the revenue that they get, and also the ability to raise more debt for intergenerational infrastructure. That's the basis of it, and that will be supported by the government. But the government does not want to currently put in resources, but they may have to at the end. Who knows?
Everybody's going to be paying for water, aren't they? They're going to pay user fees for water. And even some of the people that pay high amounts now are likely to be paying more because they're subsidising other users. So.
Yeah, the model works out around the benefits of scale, and there are benefits of scale. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The question is, have they had the sweet spot in terms of their model to get the benefits of scale? And the cost subsidisation, of course, is unusual in our world. We don't do it. In fact, in the Local Government Act, we're told not effectively to do it. And so that challenge, and if you looked at the Auckland water entity one, that's where it's most extreme. We actually have scale already operating reasonably well, who will ultimately be cross-subsidising Northland and the far north, and yet Northland and the far north, the Kaipara don't like the model. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges there, but I think one of the other outcomes of that report from Doug Martin was to improve the engagement and communication. So there's still a long way to go.
Thanks, Councillor Crosby. Mr. Chairman, did you want to add anything from a regional sector perspective or?
Thanks, Chair. Just to add on to what Councillor Crosby said, I think the reality is, you're right, this will be charging as you do in Auckland for water in and water out. And that'll be new for a lot of people. And I don't envisage with the scale of work that's in front of these entities, they'll have to prioritise it. I don't think you're going to make, I think the timescale to reduce some of these things in terms of new infrastructure, that's why I raised the question this morning, is likely to be a couple of decades. You just will not achieve this. The workforce ability to deliver some of these things, it's not going to meet it in the timescale we're going. So the only other thing I'd add is in terms of regional sector, I think in terms of RPS fresh water, we've actually moved into the implementation phase. Discussion this morning on intensive winter grazing really doesn't apply here. It applies essentially in Southland and Otago, but what I think our staff need to be aware of is that intensive winter grazing is conditional upon the geology and the makeup of the soil. So very leaky soils where you have in the central plateau, you can have really heavy intensive grazing in bad weather and it won't show anything. But the consequence effect of where all the nutrients goes is a different issue. The other one I would ask staff to have, in terms of this policy, I think we need an answer. There's a lot of these some of these regulations came into effect in terms of the 1st of July, in terms of reporting activities. I don't know where we are in terms of collaborating with other entities. Such the first one that comes to mind is the synthetic nitrogen cap. I think as an organisation, you just have to be careful we don't want to replicate and reinvent the wheel on some of the stuff. We need to be fleet of foot in terms of ensuring that we get that activity from other agencies who collect it. But I'd be interested to know where you're going to get the compliance and monitoring from in terms of that. I think the deferment in terms of MFE on the iwi engagement front with Eugene Berryman was positive. And I think if BOPRC and Committee Māori can take some credit, that probably came from those initial engagements that we had through Committee Māori. They've gone back and revisited that, so I think that's positive. And I think the issue that we're all facing in the regional sector is the resourcing, which the Chief Executive has briefed us on many times. And I'd be interested in the staff position and how much pressure we're coming on as an entity, because you may well find that you can't comprehensively cover some of the stuff because, as President Stewart said, the agenda in terms of the timeline is staying the same. We don't have a choice, so we might have to cut our cloth to meet that outcome. And it may not be 98% effective and efficient, but if it's going to be 90%, well, let's just get on with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just going back to Three Waters, obviously volumetric charging is dependent on water metering. Stuart, Councillor Crosby, your memory is far better than mine. How long did it take us from Woe to go and Tauranga City to put a meter?
I've still got the scars and required many blood transfusions and all that. That was an interesting exercise and it's quite relevant to today's conversation. One, it took a number of years. I think it was about a $13 million project from memory, which was metering and backflow preventions, and it's the best thing that the council ever did in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. But what we did and where we failed, we lost the conversation about the environmental advantages of sustainability, etc. And we got trapped into the privatisation debate. And most councils that go down the metering one do. I think it's New Plymouth doing it now, and they've learned lessons from other failures. That's staying on message and staying on what the objective is really the critical factor on these. One comment I would make, and I see this rush by government, and it's any government, it's not just this government. It does relate to the 3-year term. If you look at a lot of their drop dead dates, a lot of them are built around the 23 October election in terms of solidifying a lot of the policy changes. And it does beg the conversation again, is the 3-year term suitable for this country? One of the few that still has a 3-year term. Most of them have 4 or 5 year terms with opportunity to get rid of rogue governments. I know we had a remit in that, and it was supported by the then leader of the National Party, current Prime Minister and local government, as a concept, but that seems to fall on the back burner. And yet that, I think, is part of the failure of the rush to get this stuff done in such a short time frame.
Maybe a future for local government will address that. Stephen, can I just compliment you on the appendices, the way that they have been constructed? That's a really useful pithy summary of just, the extent of change coming at us and the complexity of it. So thank you very much.
Obviously, it's a joint effort amongst the number of teams.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. So any further debate or discussion? There being none, I'm going to move receipt of the operating environment report, seconded Councillor Love. All those in favour? Aye. Against and carried. I'm now going to move that the public be excluded from the. Thank you, Councillor Londardelson. All those in favour? Aye. Hands up. Against. Thank you. Carried. Now going to address the minutes.